It was like, thanks, King James, but we'd rather do it ourselves. Well, Europe laughed these guys to scorn. Nobody had ever had a government run from inside. You know, always they had to have a king and all this kind of stuff. I mean, nobody, how could you have everybody run a government? Everybody own all of the land? Oh, this wasn't going to last very long. They sat back, and these guys thought they could own the land, you see. Interesting, isn't it? What's so fascinating is it's still going. Okay? Now, all right? So you say, well, why didn't this idea catch on? Why didn't this just spread like wildfire and we all be born in the 30s, 40s, 50s, whenever we're born, into countries that are all over the world have these constitutions and have these self-governments? What happened? Well, we're going to find out that there's a crowd of people. As they say, we're going to find out that in the game there's another team on the field. And there's a team on the field that doesn't like internal control because that way they don't have control over you. Now, in order to win this game, we have to know what this other team is. And we're going to come back from our break, and it's called central banking. The boys live in the central bank, and the central bank gets to control the country. And I won't tell you how, because it's a big secret, and I don't want to spoil your next hour. Okay, but there's a word that explains it. Does anybody know what that word is? Okay, we'll get into it next hour. We're going to explain it. Well, I'll give you a clue. The word is debt. The control, so forth, was that one of the best, probably the best thing on economics comes out of Proverbs, written by Solomon. Proverbs is a book that Solomon wrote for his son, Rehoboam, who was probably a teenager when he wrote the book, but when Solomon wrote the book. But what it does is it explains economics. And economics is explained in one sentence. Matter of fact, it's not just explained once in one sentence, it's explained twice in one sentence. This is how complete the Bible is, all right? Let's take a look at this. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7. That one doesn't work, does it? Let's try another one. Okay. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7. Okay. That's not really great. Let's try another one. Okay. Says that the rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the servant to the lender. Now, I think that probably the reason that it was written in the old Hebrew language is it was such a precise language at that time. You could actually put it into formulas or make equations out, if you will. So let's make a formula out of language, because it says it twice. Once, the rich rules over the poor. Secondly, the borrower is servant to the lender. See, it says the same thing twice. Okay? To formulate it, it says the rich, okay, rule, actually the rich rule, okay, over the poor. That's the first thing it says. Then you can make a little plus over here. And it says the borrower is the servant, or the slave in some versions, slave to the lender. Isn't that interesting? So now I have this, not only had the fun of raising some kids, but now I've got grandkids to raise. Okay, and they ask you all these questions. It's kind of, you know, kids want to know the answer. They don't want to fool around with a bunch of gobbledygook. Okay, so all right, if a kid were to ask you now what a ruler is, how would you explain what a ruler is? What would you say? See, because if you say it's a king, that's not always true. If you say it's a president, because these guys aren't always ruling, are they? See, the answer comes right out of Solomon. Now, we've had 4,000 years to know whether Solomon knew what he was talking about or not. See, he was the richest man who ever lived and the wisest man who ever lived, in some respects. In some respects, he wasn't too smart. But on money, he was pretty smart. Okay? Okay, a ruler, got it? Ready? We're ready for some real economics. Is a rich lender. There hasn't been any deviation in that definition for 4,000 years. That is definitely the ruler. The servant, or the slave, is the poor borrower. Now, when we go to business school at People's Republic of Berkeley or Harvard or something like this, what do we learn? We learn how to get out and borrow money so we can start a business, don't we? See, notice, wrong. That's not what we should be learning. So they teach us, it's really slave school. We got a catalog from Harvard, and we thought maybe they would teach it different. We learned how to get to Washington. It seems that you go to Harvard and turn left. Okay, so what happens, you see, is that the whole education system is to put you under external control. Isn't that interesting? Do we understand why the manifesto says that the government must run all schools? Because that's what's going to be taught. This is the progressive education of John Dewey. This was started by Horace Mann back 40 years ago. And it's been culminated now into our present economic or education system, which has no education in it at all. All it is external indoctrination. Any learning is purely coincidental. Okay, now, this is economics. Some people understand it and some people don't. One guy who understood it, a very smart guy, was a guy born in Italy by the name of Cosimo Medici. Cosimo Medici started a bank in the year 1300. Okay, it was the Medici Bank. He was the governor of Florence, and Italy at that time was a loose confederation of principalities, Genoa, Venice, Milan, all these different things, Genoa. And he wanted to unify or control Italy. So what he did was he loaned money to Italy, to the prince in the principality. He had a bank up here, and he would loan money to the prince. Isn't this exciting? Now, we all know how that works. If the prince can't pay the loan back, then he gets the prince's country. See how that works? Is this fun? You know, you ever see anybody that couldn't make their car payment? They have this little tow truck comes out and tows it away. See? Isn't that fun? See, this is called kingdom towing. Okay? And what they do is they tow your country away. We now understand poli-sci. That's all there is to political science. That's it. Okay? The process is called war. Every war that I know of that's been fought in the last 400 years has been over a money issue. It was never fought by governments or by people. It was fought for the benefit of banks. All we have to know is who the bank is, and we can understand war. Sometimes they own oil. Okay, now, so what happens here is that the bank comes along. So about 1400 now, about 100 years of this, Medici's conquering this and conquering that. And every time he loans money, he has to have a big battle. So he conquered an area called Pisa in Italy, and it had a finance minister by the name of Niccolo Machiavelli. Machiavelli was a young man. He was put in exile on his property back in Pisa, and if he left his property, he was subject to be executed. All right? Machiavelli wrote a proposal to the Medici Bank, and he said, you guys have got this thing pretty good, but it could be better. This is a pretty brash thing for this guy to say, because he could have been executed at whim. And he said, every time you loan money and get one of these principalities from the prince, you have to have a war. And every time you're at risk, every time it costs you a lot of money, every time it's a lot of work. He said, if you made me the #2 man in the Medici Empire, now this guy's in exile, you know. Okay? He said, if you made me #2 man, I will show you how you can confiscate every country in the world and you'll never have a war. Well, do you think this got Medici's attention? So they brought him in, and he said, now look, he said, you make me the #2 man. He says, if this doesn't work, you can cut off my head. This guy was a real gambler. He says, if it works, I'm #2. And they said, okay. And they said, what's your plan? He says, well, it's not just a plan. You've got to do it. And they said, okay. What we're going to do, we're going to introduce a concept of balance of power. They said, balance of power? They said, yeah, balance of power. You've heard this phrase. We hear it all the time. Henry Kissinger uses it. George Bush uses it. Balance. Well, I guess he uses New World Order, doesn't he? Or something. Okay, same thing. All right. Now, so George, read my lips, Bush. Okay. You know, you can always tell when George is lying. His lips move. Okay. Now, so we don't call him George Bush. We call him George Shrub. We don't feel he's mature enough to be a Bush. Okay, so anyway, what happens here is that, okay, because you see, all he's doing is he's fronting for somebody else, isn't he? You haven't noticed it? All right, George is not his own man. All right, we'll explain. That's our... We haven't got to the funny part yet. Okay, that's next hour. All right, there we go. Okay. So he said, what you're going to do now is you're going to loan money to 2 princes. And they said, are you crazy? And he says, got to do it. Got to do it. If it doesn't work, then... And they said, well, all right. So they loan money to 2 princes. Isn't this exciting? They loan money to Prince A and to Prince B both. And the condition was that the princes had to repay the loan. They couldn't pay it back with money that they printed, so the bank would run the money in the country here. So they would print the money, you see, B controlled the money. The all the speeches by the prince now had to be approved by the bank because it was imperative that the people, the rabble down here, didn't catch on that the prince was no longer running the country for their benefit, but for the benefit of a bank. This must never be disclosed, you see. And so the speeches are written up here, and they're read down here. Get it? Okay? It's not always easy to find good speech readers. Sometimes they have to go to Hollywood. Okay, now, and so then we have war, okay? So now we have a war. This guy has to go to war whenever he's told to go to war. So he reads a speech and, oh, what do you know, we're at war. Let's see, I guess we'll give him an ultimatum. You've got till Saturday. Well, then Saturday comes, now you've got till Wednesday. Okay, now, okay, we just discussed the war in Iraq. All right, now, what happens here is that I've just described to you the 4 identifying characteristics of the Federal Reserve System in the United States for the last 82 years. It's precisely what the Federal Reserve System has been doing with our government. It owns our government. Our government does whatever the bank wants because, you see, when the bank started printing money without any backing, it was called a debt. And we pick up the interest on it. It's called the national debt. Why would we have a debt if we print our own money? Doesn't make any sense, does it? If you had a printing press in your basement, would you be in debt? See, it's not our press anymore. It belongs to the Bank of England because now we're in debt and we can't print our own money. They print it. It's been going on since 1913. You may have heard about it. It's called inflation. See, notice if you do it, it's called counterfeiting. They have a little school up the state here. It's called San Quentin, and they give the first offense, like, what is it, 17 years of remedial printing. See, they'll teach you not to print. You can print menus and newspapers, but not money. Only they can print the money. We'll talk about who they are in our third hour, too, by the way. It's not a mysterious they. It's actually 6 families. Okay? It's financial families, all right? Interesting stuff. Okay, so notice what's been going on here. We now have a central bank. This differs from a national bank because until the year 1400, all that was on the planet was national banks. In other words, the bank was run by the government. Well, the government is going to have a debt to itself, so national debt was unknown of, virtually unknown of. Never unheard of. Nobody ever heard of it. Now, you see, the bank is no longer run by anybody in the government. Matter of fact, it's probably not even run by anybody in the country here. And we have a debt. And it keeps getting bigger all the time, doesn't it? Now, I have a lot of fun when I go out to a restaurant. I get finished and I go up to the waitress and I say, listen, may I talk to the manager because all I have with me are notes. And she says, what? I said, yeah, I ate this dinner and all I got are some notes. Would your manager take a note? She says, well, I don't know. You know, go get the manager. I said, would you take a note, sir? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, I came here and I had this dinner and it was very nice and I appreciate it. And I certainly don't want to steal from you, but all I have with me are some notes. Could you possibly take a note? And he says, well, what do you mean? I said, well, let me show you. And I pull this out here, and I show him these notes that I have, see? Because now if I bought a car from, your name is John? If I bought a car from John and I gave him a note, could John buy anything with that note? Well, he might be able to get it to the bank, and maybe if my reputation is good, he could borrow it, right? But notice the note is not money, is it? Notice carefully. The note is not money, because the note is in place of money. The note is something that you give somebody when you don't have any money. You notice carefully? The Federal Reserve System has printed a dollar here, and it says Federal Reserve Note. Notice carefully, it doesn't say Federal Reserve Money, because there isn't any. Now, when a dollar is printed, it is a debt. The debt is what you pay, and it's called the national debt. Are we having fun now? Do you understand why anybody who writes anything that makes any sense in an economics exam in any government school in the country would flunk? Because economics in school is designed to cover all this up so you don't know what's going on. Now, this sounds radical, and it is. The question is it true? If it's not true, let me know, and hey, I'll stop all this and go get a job, okay? Now, but if it's true, then we have trouble in River City, don't we?